Welcome to the Sustainable Clinical Medicine Podcast. I am your host, Sarah Smith. I am a practicing rural family physician and the charting coach. This is the podcast for physicians and advanced practice providers who are ready to step back from the busyness of their clinical day to share ideas, question everything, and redesign their clinical day. We are redesigning clinical medicine to create sustainable clinical days and create time for our lives outside of medicine. Join us for discussions with world experts who are helping design sustainable models of clinical medicine and the physicians or clinicians who have discovered or designed sustainable models of clinical medicine for themselves. Hello, everybody. Welcome back. So I had this very interesting conversation with someone on Facebook recently. And she was saying, you interview a lot of coaches. Are you trying to make us coaches on this podcast? And I just loved this question. Well, I want to answer that now, right before we jump in to meet Dr. Kristi. So I'm excited for our guest today, who's also a physician coach. So you're all like, oh no, another coach, but don't worry, we're good. So one, I know a lot of coaches. So that's why they're on the podcast right now, is because I'm waiting for the brave souls who are ready to tell their before and after story to come forward with their before and after story. So keep hanging out. We will get them. We're warming them up. And when they're ready for a conversation, I will have them inside the podcast to talk to them about their journey. In the meantime, let me explain coaching. So the people who've gone ahead and become coaches have often gone through a before and after for themselves. And I kind of know a lot of them. So this is why we're interviewing coaches. Do I want you to become a coach, dear person listening? No, absolutely not. In fact, I'm going to have a conversation. I've got someone in mind about why I don't want you to become a physician coach or a clinician coach, because it kind of takes up the rest of your free time that you're creating when you're creating sustainable medicine. So it's kind of that'll be a great conversation for another day. So these interviews are to help you right now in your struggle and are not designed to make you into coaches. So don't worry, that is not my hidden agenda. It is still to help you create a sustainable clinical day. So with that, welcome Dr. Angevine. Kristi, lovely to have you. Tell us about you.
Oh, well, I love that we just get this excuse to hang out together. It's one of my favorite things to do with other physicians is be on their podcast or have them on mine and have this chance. So thank you for us getting together. I'm, as you said, I'm Kristi Angevine. My training is an OBGYN. I did private practice for about 11 years. I'm, as you mentioned in your beautiful introduction, I am a physician coach, and I also have no agenda to proselytize people to do anything with coaching. I just happened to fall into this craft and discovered I loved it as much as I loved being an OBGYN. I live in the Pacific Northwest. I live in the dry Pacific Northwest in Oregon. I'm married, have 2 kids, and my life coaching practice focuses on habits.
Mm-hmm. And that's going to be really interesting to chat to you about habits. I'm going to be so curious how you got into habits. And given that this is going to be aired probably in December, we're all kind of starting to think about our goals again, because, the new year's coming. And it's one of those things that as our society, we tend to be thinking, what do I want to achieve for 2024 that I haven't yet achieved? That's kind of been on my radar for a while, but I keep putting down because I'm so dang busy or whatever that might be. So tell us about you and your journey. What was not going well with medicine? What did that look like for you?
Yeah. So I love reflecting back on this because it's almost nostalgic to think back to what went well and what didn't go well. The things that weren't going well for me in clinical practice they probably boil down to, I'd say 3 or 4 main things. I had a difficult time staying on task. I would always want to make sure all my patients' questions were always answered fully, even if that meant I was running massively behind. I had trouble charting in a way that was efficient. I had trouble with people pleasing and saying yes at my own expense, which, had me bringing work home because things were kind of bloated in how I managed my time. And I would be, on committees, doing projects, doing things that I was passionate about, but that I didn't actually realistically have time to fit into my schedule if I wanted to prioritize other things outside of work.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think those were the main things. It was essentially some perfectionism,
Mm-hmm.
some wobbly self-trust, and a lot of people pleasing. And I also just, I don't think I had the tools to know how to use my time efficiently in a way that wasn't at the expense of what I saw as integrity with patient care. So
Mm-hmm.
I grappled with all that and I
Mm-hmm.
didn't know my way out. Um, and there were a lot of things that ultimately made that better. And I think one of the things that's a little bit special about my story is that I found a way that made my clinical practice sustainable. I mean, you're always sort of talking about that theme of how do we keep
Mm-hmm.
people happy and content and thriving in their clinical practice in a sustainable way. I found a way that made that work. And it was life-changing to have that shift.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, I found something that I liked just as much
Mm-hmm.
that I decided to do, not because what I was doing wasn't sustainable, but because I just found something I like to do as much, if not more.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so, because I think a lot of us think, oh, well, I will never change my job unless I'm just too miserable and I have to go.
Mm-hmm.
You can actually change your job just because you want to, even though
Mm-hmm.
you found a way to make it sustainable. So,
I love that. So it's that I love it and I could love something else as well. So it wasn't that I have to leave this. This is unsustainable. It was, oh, I figured it out. And I also decided I wanted something else.
exactly. And that, that cliche of the grass is always greener. I mean, the truth in that is that, I mean, one of the things that I've dealt with that I sort of knew intellectually I would deal with, but didn't know the lived experience would be so palpable is that in shifting, because I did leave behind a lot of the things in medicine, like in my current practice, I'm not dealing with electronic medical records. I'm not dealing with discharge summaries, right? Those things aren't there.
Mm-hmm.
But I am still dealing with the very exact, or maybe not the exact, but very similar challenges
Yes.
personally in
Yes.
my entrepreneurial venture with
Yes.
people pleasing and perfectionism and, management of time and not letting work bleed out into all those same things that were really nicely or as nicely as I could solved in my other
Mm-hmm.
job are now still things
They
that I
follow
grapple with,
you.
right? They imagine that, right?
I have discussed that before on the podcast that I had a chatting problem in Australia in a different, completely different healthcare system. And then I brought it with me to Canada, right? Into a completely different healthcare system, completely different way of seeing patients. And this thing followed me, and it was clearly a me problem. Like it was it's a system problem. Yes, we all we agree that of course the system could be improved. Of course, there's different ways to do things, but it was clearly me showing up in this environment, and this environment it's the consistency piece was me. So these problems do not go away just because we change our job or change the style of things we're doing or go work for somebody else or move across the world. Unfortunately, we bring ourselves with us. So dang
Exactly.
it. So tell us then, you were back in this whirlwind of a day where you're not running on time, you're having difficulty staying on task, you're staying to answer every single question. What is that costing you? So what does your day as Dr. Kristi in that moment look like? Tell us about it.
Oh my goodness. So I feel like I'm trying to think if I don't know if there's two words that come to mind. I felt harried
Mm-hmm.
and stuck.
Mm-hmm.
Like I didn't have like running on fumes. That's the other
Mm-hmm.
thing that crosses my mind
Mm-hmm.
because I, love my patients. Like with in OBGYN, there's a lot of intimacy, there's a lot of tragedy, there's a lot of, complexity with, talking people through either surgery or medicines or menopause or, their libido. And finding that that I wasn't able to show up with as much like, cheerful, like authentically cheerful energy
Mm-hmm.
because I was so tired, because I was essentially just feeling like if I'm perpetually running behind and I feel like it's my fault, and yet there's, so many patients to be seen and the time is shrinking. I was
Mm-hmm.
constantly like living in this pressure cooker, obviously of my own making, but
Mm-hmm.
not realizing I was in this pressure cooker of my own making. So I was just exhausted. I would I would get up early in the morning to, do some like pre-charting or something like that sometimes. And so my morning would be occupied doing that stuff. And as soon as I would hear somebody else wake up in my house, I would get annoyed. Oh my gosh, somebody else is getting up. That means this time that I'm doing now so I can get home early is going to be infringed upon. And so I would find myself edgy and irritable with the very people that I was trying to get home to be with. And then, I'd go to work, I'd run around with the chicken with my head cut off, like a chicken with my head cut off, but try to pretend like I felt totally chill and fine and everything is good and be faking it as much as I could. And then get overwhelmed, seeing my inbox or seeing how far behind I was, or realizing that I felt like I needed to be in two places at once, but didn't know how. And then I would be coming home late into the evening, and I had a very supportive spouse who was like, listen, don't say you're on your way until like you're in the car.
Yes.
Because if you say you're on your way, but then you do like 3 more discharge summaries, you're not really on your way, and then the dinner I have for you is going to be cold. So just because I had such a tendency to be like, you know what, I'm leaving right now, and find one more thing and one more thing and one more thing. And so I would be at work way later than I ever imagined I'd be at work, because I wanted to get things done. So I wanted to start fresh the next day or something like that. Even if I wasn't actually ever getting things down to zero, I was just getting them done enough.
Yeah.
So I was just exhausted,
Did you remember to text him to say I'm on my way, or had he texted you?
So I would always text. Yeah.
Okay.
I was pretty good about that. But what we discovered would happen is I would say, hey, I'm on my way. And either I would get distracted and I would pick up something else and I really wasn't actually on my way. I would then 45 minutes later go, I'm in the car now, or I would run into somebody in the parking lot who maybe would start talking longer, and I didn't know how to extricate myself diplomatically. So I would just stand there and like listen to them talking at me, even though I had said I'm on my way. And so we realized this trend. And so the solution we came up with was when you are about to back out of the parking lot, that's when you say I'm on my way. Right.
Got it.
Yeah.
I would have the experience that it would be, I can't remember the exact time, but I think we were eating supper about 6 because of the kids being younger. And so it would be about 5:15. I would get a text saying, where are you? Or when do you expect to be home? Or what's happening? Or and that that experience of the frustration that you would have when the kids would wake up in the morning. I would have that. I would be like, stop it, I just got in my flow. And I'm like,
my goodness,
it's pack up time. I've completely lost awareness of time. I need to text back and say, okay, coming. And then either I have that call to do, or I'd kind of jump in and do a few more things and then jump in the car. And he's like, are you in an accident? Like, I need to know where you are. Like, not like I need to know where you are, like micromanage. It's more like, hey, the patient's left hours ago. What's going on? And just not this.
Yes.
And I'm like, I don't know how to fix this. It was my life.
And exactly. And what's crossing my mind now as you're saying this, because I had a very similar experience, is I'm thinking about, from my family's perspective, they knew essentially it's safest to not expect mom home before 6 o'clock, right? Or before whatever o'clock. It just in general. And if I was like, I'm going to be home early, they're like, when we see you, we'll see you. And even though I had that sort of like general like line in the sand of like, okay, at 5:30, I'm wrapping up because I will be home at 6. Even when I got better at being about sort of like having that clear boundary. One of the things I think from my husband's perspective, and this is just, I mean, I've heard him talk about this a little bit, so I think I can hypothesize and speculate I think he was always sort of living like not ever knowing when like his childcare duties were going to end and when I would show up and be able to be there. And so that sort of left him, because we have young children, in a bit of a lurch with like, how can I make any plans to go do anything in any evening when I have no idea ever? And theoretically, I can't have any idea ever, because I never know, because who knows what's going to happen, what I can do. And so there was a lot of like just this nebulous like lack of ability for my family to do things because of my like uncertainty of like when I might come home, because it wasn't clear. It wasn't like, oh, your shift is done, you're home. Like it was,
I get to leave at 4 or 5 or whatever the shift ends.
Do that.
Exactly. Okay. So you would have this kind of boundary for yourself for getting home. Were you done? Was the day done?
I mean, it would depend, right? Like sometimes, other times, even if, and I would say sometimes the day was done. And like, it was done. It was fine. Like, all emergencies are taken care of. It was done. And I would still be bringing home and be thinking about and ruminating over and wondering. I'd still be like, my mind would still be at work, even if
So the
my
patients
kids
are
were at work.
coming home with you
Yes.
in your head.
In my head, right? And other times the work, and then on the flip side, other times the work would not be done. Like, there would be a couple open-ended things that I left on purpose. I have 2 questions for 2 consultants. I'm not closing these charts. They're done. And it would feel like a clean break. Like, it's open on purpose. And but mentally I was done, right? So there's those 2 different, it would depend. And those were on the good days. Good days, like, there could, the inbox could have things in it, but it was a manageable amount. It was fine, no problem, clean. Or, yes, there might be patients I think about, but it was in a clean way. Like, it was fine. Just like, oh, I hope she's doing okay. Right. That type of thing. But on the vast majority of the time, it was not like that. It would follow me home, even if it was done.
Yeah. Yeah. I loved what you said before, running on fumes. And I remember having a thought, I need to clone myself. That being in 2 places at once,
right?
I need a clone. Like, literally, how can I clone myself? And I don't need just one of me. I need kind of 3.
100%. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Agree. Okay. What about other things like the you? How are you looking after you right then? What did that look like? Because you're OBGYN, presumably at some point you're doing surgery or babies or something. Like, there's some sort of call presumably required for this.
Oh, totally. Yeah. We had a kind of in my most recent job, we had a traditional call model where we were on call, usually for a 24-hour shift, or for a while we did like a night float. But yeah, there was definitely that. I will say one of the things that I've always done is, until recently, until I've had more freedom, which is, the irony is, one of the things I've always been really good at is incorporating an exercise or movement or something like that. I was always quite sporty in residency. I, did a lot of mountain biking. But the reason I did it was because if I didn't do it, I felt horrible. So I was almost like, in at least residency and training, and also in my most recent job, it was a little bit out of desperation. Like, the only thing that I, can get for myself, my only time is this. And I would pigeonhole it and I would do it. And I was pretty consistent with it. But it took a lot of effort to do. And it was at the expense of sleep. I would sleep less to get up to exercise because, in my mind, it's important, it's helpful, it's fun, I like it. It was one of those things I wasn't willing to give up, but I would skimp on sleep and would, OBGYNs, we kind of like poo-poo the need for sleep. We'll sleep when we're dead. It's fine. Who cares if we didn't sleep last night? We can do a clinic all day the next day. Like, it's not a big deal. Lots of minimizing, that type of thing. And I didn't really realize how exhausted I was. Right. So sleep would suffer. Exercise would not. I had 0 white space. I definitely didn't have time where I would just like sit and do nothing, except if I was like a zombie. Right.
Got it. Okay, so every waking minute is filled with something, whether it be
yes,
work
or
exercise or other parenting kind of things, taking on small kids at home. Yeah. What else?
In terms of
like weekends, after the kids went to bed, what did that look like?
I feel like for OBGYNs, weekends kind of blend together. Like, it is kind of like the rest of the week, because, if you're on call on the weekends, it's not really a weekend. It's just a continuation of the same week. So I don't know that I had such a discrete, like, these are weekends and these are weeks. It was just, it kind of would. But I will say, like, when there would be specific time off,
yes,
patients that I worried about, they would follow me. They'd be in my mind. I would always, I would, when I would leave a call shift, I wasn't one of those people who would leave the call shift and not be thinking about, I would, for sure, I ruminated quite a bit. I would be like, oh, was that checkout okay? Did I pass on the right information? Did I forget anything? It would even follow, like, even on those weekends where, like, we were out of town. It was there as like a I don't know, I have 2 children. It was like the 3rd child, that kind of came along with us. So it would be there, and for sure, on, like, if we had a vacation, I would do as much of my charting as I possibly could before we left, and like labs and all those things, just to, just because I wanted them tended to. And then as soon as we'd get back, before I'd go to work, I would always open up my chart and go through as many messages as I could, and like beat myself up for like maybe missing something, or like I didn't see this or I didn't see that, or look at all these messages that are here. It would frame the time off.
Yeah. What was that holiday preparation like? Was it just like that day you would just stay until it was all done, or was it like days and days of work? What is that kind of remembering?
It was, as I think back, like it kind of varied. Like in the beginning when I was in early attending, it would be like days of not days of catch up, but like my charting was, I would get so far behind in it, and we didn't have EMR. It was all just like dictating. And so I would have these stacks of charts around
Oh,
me. And I would make sure that they were all done before I left, or try to, and then when I couldn't, because I would run out of time, I would just leave them, and then I would just like worry about them. And then as I moved to EMR and getting a little bit more efficient with things, I would usually try, I would try to bang it out usually in like a night or two, just to get it all done in terms of preparation. Then when things got more efficient, then I didn't have such a mountain of things facing me, waiting for me before vacation. But it was always either at least a day, if not a couple.
Yeah. What about those charts when you're looking at them? They're stacking high in your office. What had you done about the chart? Like what was in the chart to kind of remind you about this person? What would you capture in the room or in real time?
Like when I was still struggling with things, or when I was doing well. Okay,
Oh,
when I was
no,
struggling.
no, when you were well in the mess of it.
Yeah, wellness. So I did a combination of things. Like sometimes I would frantically type just a bunch of, things in the HPI, because it would always jog my memory. And I found that if I had a bunch of even just like incidental details about their social situation, about how their kid loved the, particular cartoon episode last week, that would help me be able to go back in time and remember clinical details. Um, but at one point in time, I remember when I hadn't quite figured out how to do that, I would have sticky notes all over things, like little sticky notes that would remind me of things. And like, these are the social things, and these are the clinical things, and just a mess of like reminders all over, like the manila folders, or whatever the folders are that they would be in. Just lots and lots and lots of notes.
Yeah, because you're not alone, and there are people still out in the world. Our physicians and clinicians listening may still be in the sticky note phase or the breadcrumb phase, and so I just want you to know that this is not uncommon, and it's quite that I don't know where we learnt it from, but it's kind of that disaster avoidance minimum we can get away with because everything's going wrong and we're running on fumes kind of approach to this clinical day. And then you said that you figured it out. So now everyone's like perched on the side of their chair going, how did she figure that out? So tell us, what were the things that you started to do about your day to make it more sustainable?
Yeah. So, and I'll just preface this with it. I think, you and I probably have a similar take on this, that there's not like one cookie cutter approach. There's not one approach that universally works for everybody. Everybody tries something different. And,
Yes.
what works for other people were disasters for me, and vice versa. Right. But so number one, I tried to scribe for a while, and that was, as I, especially as I found some that were excellent, it was amazing. And then when they were gone and they left, I remember thinking, oh, like, oh, bleepity bleep, this is awful, because now I've got this gap to fill.
Yes.
And I remember that when a particularly excellent scribe left, I realized, since I didn't foresee getting another one in the future, I needed to be able to fulfill that role myself in a way that was sustainable. And I essentially, with my notes, I fully adopted B minus charting. Instead of doing paragraphs, I did bullets, or I just wrote sentences. And instead of it being like a beautiful essay form with a nice introductory sentence and indentations, it was just a block of text. But it was an efficient block of text because it had everything I needed in it. And so I essentially got really fast at typing, and I managed my mind around essentially a sense of trust that I was going to include everything that was includable. And I was going to trust that what I had documented in that moment was what it was needed. And I was going to conclude it and walk away. So what got better was my willingness to not like go over and over and over and over the chart to make sure, like, did I put this in? I would just, in addition to things like dot phrases and things like that, I just trusted that what I wrote down that's what I did. That's what she said. That's what is happening. And these are the three things I need to follow up on, that
Mm-hmm.
I made sure there was a system for that, so that it, like, I could, after the patient was done, I closed the chart and it was just done. So
Mm-hmm.
mentally it was done because I trusted myself that it was there. And I kind of trusted, I had to learn to trust that if I did forget something, that I was going to be able to handle the consequences of that. Like if
Mm-hmm.
I said, oh, hey, in 3 months we'll call and talk to you about your S-ray screen, and I forgot to say that, something like that, I had to trust that I would only forget the things that were going to be small, that weren't going to be like majorly, instrumental for their care.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a lot of trust that went into. So number one, faster typing, finishing my charts between each patient, being willing to run a little behind on the next patient because I was finishing something up on the first patient so I could be fully present with the next one.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think bigger than that, sort of like almost framing that, was, in addition to the self-trust piece, was this, instead of walking around being like, I have to be here, I have to do this, I have to finish this note, I have to see this next patient, I had to shift that to seeing how I was actually choosing to be there. Like, I'm choosing to be in a job that requires EMR, and I'm choosing to be in a job that schedules patients at this interval, and I'm choosing to be here. So I'm choosing. And if I'm choosing, then how can I choose to make this 15 minutes the best experience for myself and for my patient as possible, even though that's going to mean I'm going to have to be willing and be brave to sort of refrain from my people pleasing. And when our time is approaching the end of our visit, unless there's something really, really meaningful and a compelling reason to keep going, I have
Mm-hmm.
to be able to wrap things up in a way that leaves somebody feeling cared for, and at
Mm-hmm.
the same time keeps me on track so that I can continue to care for all the others. So there's a big, like, I had to examine my people pleasing and learn to be uncomfortable with setting some boundaries. And like, that wasn't very, it wasn't like this graceful thing, like, oh, just one day people pleasing just evaporated. It was like ooh, that boundary was a little bit clunky. Oh, this is a better way to do this. Oh, this is
Mm-hmm.
there was that. And then I think the biggest piece, as I think about this, like as I was reflecting before we spoke, probably the biggest piece that helped me, that if it wasn't there, I don't think I could have got to the other side, so to speak, was to be able to have self-compassion.
Mm-hmm.
I think that was absolutely missing. So anytime I was running behind, or anytime I was tired, or anytime that I was, resenting something at work because I was tired, I just, I felt yucky as a person. I felt like there was something wrong with me because, number one, I couldn't handle it, or what was my problem that I had such a bad attitude in this first world situation. Like, I'm not living in a cardboard box struggling for food, and here I am whining, complaining, and I would be really mean to myself about my struggling, instead of going, oh, like, it makes sense. Like, makes sense I'm tired right now. I've been awake for, 18 hours. Or it makes sense that I'm feeling a little discouraged when I'm looking at my inbox because, well, there's a lot of things to do there and I have other things I'd like to do. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
that makes sense. And as soon as I dropped the judgment for my experience and I was able to talk to myself kind of in a much more neutral or nice way, and be like, essentially like, no wonder this is hard, honey. Like, yeah, of course, anybody else in the world, I can normalize it. Anybody else in the world would struggle with this too. Okay. Then I was able to actually just like get to work and like actually do the things that needed to be done, because I wasn't in the back of my mind being like, what a screw up you are. Like, what's your problem? I didn't have that also,
Yeah.
just like as the beat down on top of, what already felt difficult.
So true. So true. I really have so much love for those who are getting to the end of the day and they're looking at that mountain of work that's still to be done. And they want to say, I haven't done enough, or I'm not good enough because. I'm like, no, you've just put in a whole day and this is just things in your inbox. Like, that's not a reason to be mean to you. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And yet
Mm-hmm.
it's such a pattern, right? That's like,
Such a
may have,
pattern.
who
Yes.
knows when it started, right? Some of us, it started in
Should be
middle
better at this
school.
by now, or this shouldn't have this many things in here, or they should stop messaging me so much, or I shouldn't have to do all of this, or all of that stuff, right? It's just meanness, just being
Yeah.
mean. Mm-hmm.
Meanness, and usually meanness that we don't notice as meanness, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
right.
unless we turn it to the second person and we
Hmm.
say it to somebody else, we
Yes.
don't notice how mean it is.
Yeah.
And that's just, that's one of those interesting things to unpack, to go, oh, because once you see the meanness, it's hard to unsee it, right?
Yeah. So tell us about how you got into working with physicians on habits. Tell us about that. What do you do?
Yeah. So the way I got into it is so number one, I recognized that I had a bunch of habits. I mentioned
Mm,
people pleasing. I was excellent at ruminating,
uh-huh,
overthinking, overanalyzing, struggling
uh-huh,
with decision making. I had
uh-huh,
all sorts of numbing behaviors. I would try to exercise a bad day away. Like, bad day, let's go exercise. Let's go online shopping. Let's
uh-huh,
go fantasize about, like, what vacation I'm going to go on. Let's grab a glass of wine. Let's eat some more chips that I had all sorts of ways to cope that weren't awful. Like, there's nothing wrong with using some of those things to cope sometimes, like exercise is amazing, right? But that didn't get to the core of why I was actually, like, feeling so haggard and running on fumes in the first place.
mm,
Um, and I would and when I discovered life coaching, I realized that there were all sorts of tools for, like, thinking about thinking and for emotional processing and for examining why we do what we do. Once I realized that, I realized, oh, I have I don't just have, like, a perfectionism, sort of a habit. I have all sorts of habits that are these learned solutions that I haven't examined yet, and they're fascinating. And I started working with physicians initially who were struggling kind of secretly and, worried
mhm,
about the stigma of their habit of drinking and their habit of
mhm,
overeating. And they would
mhm,
do it quietly and they wouldn't want to talk to their psychiatrist about it or to their partners about it. And so I worked with a lot of them and I realized that their drinking or their eating or their numbing behaviors, that was just the tip of the iceberg, and
mhm,
underneath those, like, quote, "bad habits," I'm doing air quotes for people listening,
mhm.
underneath those bad habits were habits of thinking, were
Right.
approaches to life that were the real habit underlying things, and so that's when my, sort of passion, like, very explicitly blossomed. I was always interested in why people do what they do, but I
Yeah.
didn't realize, "Oh, it's the habit piece that I find fascinating," and
Uh-huh.
so then that's when that idea sort of blossomed in terms of, like, "Oh, there are things about our sort of socialized and patterned ways of thinking and things that we've either inherited or we've just learned that we can unlearn if we want to, if there's an underbelly to them. And that's really exciting and that's fun. That's the thing that kind of my excitement about it is amazing, right? It's awesome. And at the same time, that's where some of the underbelly can happen for me is when I can get so excited about my work and I want to spend a lot of time doing it. It's very easy as an entrepreneur, just similar to how I would do an OBGYN, to let my work bleed into my personal life because of that passion, right? So I have to watch my own habit for that, given that I love what I do.
Got it. Okay. So the habit of overthinking, I just love this because I don't think that we think about this as a habit.
Mm, absolutely.
Right.
Sometimes
Certainly
yeah,
coming home and having a drink and then having another one, or overeating, you can think of them as habits, but the ruminating, getting very good at ruminating, overthinking, getting very good at overthinking, I don't think I've heard it expressed like that. And I think a lot of us would be like, oh, yeah, I do that. Or, oh, I see what you're talking about. So that must have been a discovery for you as well, to know that that's possibly a habit that is also learnable behavior that can be
100%.
unlearned if you want to, which is like fascinating that this, but I just overthink about patients, or I overthink things before I make a decision, or I over, like, what? That's fixable? I didn't understand.
Totally. Yeah. I think, I mean, you hit the nail on the head with, I mean, for me, it was a big aha, like wasn't like a light bulb moment. It was one of those, like, over time realizing, wow, okay, these things that we think maybe are intrinsic to our personality.
Mm,
Yeah. I mean, obviously that's a big debate, like what's intrinsic versus what's learned, but
yes.
many things are learned that we think are just, oh, this is my type A perfectionistic doctor mind at work. It's like,
Mhm.
well, some of these habits that, might have an underbelly like overthinking, some of them served us really well.
Yeah.
Some of them were amazing. I mean, in residency, there might have been a time where your catastrophic thinking was extremely helpful for you to make sure that you didn't miss that one thing, right? To keep people
Hmm.
safe.
Hmm.
And yet, catastrophic thinking and rumination and then beating yourself up for not knowing something has an
Hmm.
underbelly on the back end if it's chronic, right? And
Hmm.
so even though, like, a lot of us, when we think of our habits, like especially the new year, right? We're thinking, oh, like, what are my New Year's resolutions going to be for my new habits? We think of
Yes.
our morning routine or we think of our evening routine or making
Yes.
sure we don't press snooze or don't procrastinate.
Hmm.
And yes, those are some of our habits. They're the behavioral ones. But the ones that I find are the most fascinating are the habits of thinking and the habits of beliefs that are underpinning some of those, right?
Yes. Yes. Well, it's much easier to put down catastrophizing if you're intoxicated, right? So you might think, I want to drink less, But then you get, but now you continue to catastrophize all the way to bedtime. You're like, this isn't any fun. Why did I decide that stopping drinking would be a good idea?
Exactly. Because like, what's there when you're not drinking, or what's there when you're not picking up your phone? What's there for you? And those are usually the obstacles to what I would call sustainable habit change, long-term, lifelong habit changes, the unanticipated obstacles that we weren't taught how to deal with.
Yes. So important, because the stopping drinking could actually be the easy part. The stop over catastrophizing, if we think of that as the habit that you want to actually get to so that you don't feel like you need the drink or the extra packet of chips or the candy bar from the kitchen in the common room at the hospital or whatever. I don't think I've ever come up with a New Year's resolution to stop overthinking or stop overworking
or get your inner critic over catastrophizing, to not be so mean, right? Like, and that's another thing.
Like, New Year's resolution for us all. Like, not that we're necessarily wanting a New Year's resolution, but when we're starting to think about what do I want to put into my next year, it might be what do I want to take out of my new year.
That's a brilliant way to put it. I love that.
And it could be that, I want to work on my overthinking or my overworking or my over catastrophizing or my over perfectionism or my over. There we go, everybody. Now we've got some ideas to start thinking about. Kristi has tickled our brains.
So good. So good.
So if somebody's saying, well, I come home and I throw down the first glass of wine and I pick up another one, that's also something that you have worked with people on.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. And I think as a coach, I mean, there's a special space in coaching that feels quite safe for anybody who's dealing with a habit that they find there to be any sort of shame associated with or social stigma around, that they're nervous about talking about in a place where they feel like it might be documented in a way that's going to follow them. And so a lot of my work there was to meet that need for people feeling like there's psychological safety.
So I think that's really important, because we still, even though we're trying very hard to put down mental health as a stigma and a reason for being shamed or guilted, it's still reportable for many, many physicians and clinicians, right? It's still a potentially reportable problem. And so if you can hide it, that's something that they, of course your brain's going to want to hide it because you don't want to be in trouble.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right. And so now we're saying, listen, it doesn't have to get to the point of crisis. If you're like, I don't want to do this as much, I just want some help here. It's like, that is available, which I love about the coaching space too. And it isn't a space of diagnosis. Like we've already said, coaching never replaces your doctor, your psychiatrist, your therapist, your medications. It's not diagnostic. It's a different platform for saying, I want different, and who in the world could help me get that, right?
Yeah. I love the idea that you have a team of supporters, right? You have your physician, you have maybe your friends, you have your community, you have your partners, you have your coach, you might have a trainer at the gym, you might have somebody who, I don't know, a speaking coach or a writing coach. I mean, coaching is definitely not a replacement. It is just an adjunct.
Yeah, just a tool. It's just an interesting space to find ways of looking after yourself. So if somebody was in that kind of miserable middle that you experienced, what would you say to them if they also identified with that kind of overthinking, over catastrophizing? Where did they start? So what do you say is the thing that, where could people start about that?
So number one, and this is always, I think, a little bit challenging to wrap your mind around, at least it is for my clients, and it was for me. I just want to be that sort of merchant of hope to say it is absolutely possible to get to a place where it doesn't feel so hard and doesn't feel so stuck and doesn't feel so awful. I think that was one of the hardest things for me, was thinking that it was possible that change. I just didn't. I thought maybe for other people, like other people could change their job, change their mindset, change all these things about them. and they would feel better, but I was probably just stuck being stuck. I,
Mhm.
I, I don't think I believed it was possible. So I just want to say, been there, done that, and it actually is possible. So, and then in terms of like, where do you start? I always think the first place is just identifying what's going on right now that you don't like and being very clear about that. And it might be, oh, I don't like that I'm ruminating.
Mm.
And if you notice that right after you say, oh, I don't like that I'm ruminating, catastrophizing, you follow that up with like, yeah, but that's just me. You
Yeah,
get to
that's just
drop
me.
that part and say, yeah. Or these are just like we would, just like with our patients who are writing down their list of symptoms or writing down their, like all the things, that they are reporting to us. We're just putting them in categories. We get to put our habits in categories and just be like, okay, these are just neutral things. I happen to catastrophize. I happen to have a really sharp inner critic, and I happen to always think it's better to be better. So my perfectionism is quite strong.
Mm-hmm.
And I, for the people who, like, oh, I'm consuming more alcohol than it feels like a great relationship with alcohol for me. And I'm also using food and going to the pantry as my only alone time away from my family and gobbling up a bunch of chocolate.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, those are the things I'm doing. And you get to like list them out and be like, if these things aren't serving my life in a way that I like, how can I just see them as neutral things that I can change and
Yes.
remind myself these are learned and
Yes.
anything that's learned can be unlearned. And with that place, that sort of brings in that self-compassion piece of like, okay, these are manageable, figure outable, and it's okay.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think just that identifying where you are and how you'd like to be and that the space in between is overcomable
Yeah.
is the first step. And then how you get there, the how is always different for everybody, right? But I always think it's great to reach out to other people who've done it before. Like follow the breadcrumbs of your friends. You don't always have to hire a professional, right? But
Mm.
getting outside perspective, getting outside help, I think is always key. And that might be that you read a book or that you read a podcast and you don't
Yeah.
just, the other habit I talk about is passive consumption, where we just learn and learn and learn and learn and never apply anything. So you have
Yeah.
to monitor for that. But like you can always just go get outside perspective in a resource. And
Mm-hmm.
then of course I think like the best way to go about this is always getting somebody who is professionally trained to help you with that, whether they are a therapist or a mentor or
Mm-hmm.
a sponsor or a coach.
Nice. I like that. I like just making it easier with, we just notice, to stop and notice, what are you whining about? What are you not liking? What is creating a net negative for you now that might have been good initially?
Exactly.
And then, so things that you can list them all down and just say, and all of this is figure outable, right?
Yeah. Even if you don't quite believe that. And just
Even
notice,
if you
oh,
don't believe it.
I don't believe
Yes.
that. I think that's a bunch of garbage. It's a bunch of hooey that those coaches are talking about. It's like, yeah, okay, I get it. It might sound too good to be true. I totally get it.
Yes.
It's not, but I get that. I mean, I have a very sharp, sort of skeptical, cynical side that's just like,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if this is possible, right? And we just get to acknowledge and have space for that as well.
Yeah, yeah. I remember the very first time I heard a coach say, joy is available to you right now. And I'm thinking, absolutely not. You have no idea what I deal with in my day. Joy is not available. I'm like,
Yeah.
that is impossible. And then the stepping towards, what if she was just right? What if I just believed that maybe she's right? Maybe it is possible to have joy, maybe not 100% of the time. Maybe I could look at, when do I have joy in my day? Give me just tiny snippets. Show me just tiny snippets of when joy is available to me, even when I feel like I'm running on fumes and I need to clone myself.
Exactly. I think whenever you hear something that makes you roll your eyes so hard that you think
Yes.
you're going to like pull a muscle or
Yes.
you want to like punch somebody, like
That's right. Yeah. That is wrong.
that
She's so
right.
wrong.
So wrong. That's your cue to go, okay, what about this seems so
Mm-hmm.
inaccessible right now?
Mm-hmm.
Because whenever something feels really, really, really like kind of rigid and tight, that we
Yeah.
have that visceral response, it's like, okay,
Yes.
that's just a cue
That
to be
is a
like,
cue.
how come this feels, and how come I really just hate that she said joy is available to you now? like when it's like, nope, I haven't slept for 3 days. It's not available right
It's
now,
not
like
available.
not available. Okay, what's going on that makes it not available? And I like how you put it too, like, what if there is a shred of truth to this? Like, not 100% available, but like, what if there is? And what's the cost to me for entertaining that
Mm.
other way of looking at it? Like, is there a risk? And if there's not, then could we get into that space of being a little bit more, like you were saying, like sort of nicely considering what's possible, what's already here, where can I, how can I? Right?
Yeah. It just gives you that little bit of hope and that little bit of, I have a bit of choice here. Or maybe there's a possibility that could become true. So, Kristi, I have loved this conversation. Where can people find you if they are curious? Even like, what is your podcast? Tell us about that.
Right. Oh, that's right. So yeah, we're on a podcast. I didn't think about talking about a podcast. So I keep everything super simple. My podcast is called Habits on Purpose. My business is Habits on Purpose. My website is habitsonpurpose.com. And then Kristi Angevine is my name, and you can find me on social media in terms of, I probably old school because I do Facebook and then still getting on Instagram. And, I run a program for women physicians called Habits on Purpose for Physicians. It's just small group coaching to give them, very similar to Charting Champions, that community and that support for evaluating what's working and what's not. And then I do private coaching for anybody.
Nice. I love that. Thank you so much for coming. Is there anything we didn't talk about that you had wanted to talk about before we wrap up?
I feel like we honestly touched on so many things already. It seems perfect. I feel like we could have a part 2 and continue talking about this in 2024, but I feel like we touched on all the pertinent things, and
wonderful.
It was a great conversation.
Let's have part 2. Let's talk about some more. We'll do that. We'll make a part 2. Love it. Thank you, everybody. Have a great rest of your week. Just FYI, we have Backlog Buddies starting up in December, and I just wanted to mention this because it's kind of cool. It's a group where you can come to do your backlog. Yay! So it is protected time where you can come and get your backlog done. If you are curious, if you want to know more, either check me out on Instagram because we're putting it in there, or go to the website chartingcoach.ca so you can figure out what is Backlog Buddies. If you're on my email list, you will be notified. And if you're not on my email list, go to the website, sign up for anything there, and you get on the email list. Okay, you're good. Thank you so much again, Dr. Kristi Angevine. Appreciate you being here.
Thank you.
Thank you for being part of the Sustainable Clinical Medicine podcast. If you'd like to learn more or join us to help you get home with today's work done, go to chartingcoach.ca. There you'll find all the information on the premier Lifetime Access Charting Champions program that is helping physicians get home with today's work done, with all the proven tools, support, and community you need to create time for your life outside of medicine. We would love to see you there. Until next time, thanks for listening.